Hi, folks. How are we doing today?
Good, Frank. How you doing?
That must be Greg.
No one really cares.
Not true, Francis.
Welcome, everyone, to what's going to be a special event for us, I think. Rob Jarratt is one of those unsung Brunswick people, you know? Just about everything that's happened in Brunswick over the last, 75 or 80 years, Rob?
At least.
If you go down through the list of credits, you find Rob's name. Music theater, BDA, merchants associations, and all that stuff. Anyway, he's here to tell us some stories. And some of them, you're going to find some of them to be very personal and very interesting. All of them are going to be interesting. Some of them are going to be very personal and very, very enlightening. So, Rob, it's your show.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Stacy sends her apology. She intended to introduce you because, you know, Stacy and Rob have a history that maybe you'd like to go into, but I don't want to go into.
I will. I better get that over with right
Anyway, so, but she double books herself every once in a while. So, Rob, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Frank, I could tell stories about you, but that will take another, decade or so. But I am going to put this down because I'm more comfortable with it. If my voice doesn't project enough, please let me know. So I'm gonna hit you with some basic statistics, 3 or 4, not much more, because that's all we need, and they've been gleaned from my reading and my talking and my research, and they center around chronic pain. One of them, which I find very telling, is that chronic pain, first of all, is defined as pain that persists for 3 months or more. So that's chronic pain. This book that you see right here, entitled A Nation in Pain, written by Judy Foreman, has been sort of my basic research book. And she says, through her own research, that out of 238 million adults living in the United States today, 100 million of them are experiencing chronic pain. So it's an epidemic, but it's hardly recognized by conventional medicine as something that needs to be treated. It's an epidemic unto itself. It's a disease. So that's one. The other thing that's very telling is that the suicide rate among people who are experiencing chronic pain is twice that of the general population. So anybody who says that chronic pain or pain does not kill you is wrong. That was stated glibly to me one time when I was really suffering serious pain. It's not going to kill you. Well, it can, because in my worst state, I actually considered the unthinkable. But thanks to a great family and wonderful support, I didn't go that route. But I was in such desperate straits during that time that I even thought about that. So I'd like to do a little survey right now. I love surveys. And you're a captive audience, and it'll get me to know you a little bit better. And that is, how many of you here are experiencing chronic pain under the definition that I just mentioned? Okay, I would say roughly maybe 3/5 of our audience. How many of you are also connected either familially or through friendship with somebody who's experiencing chronic pain? Okay, a lot more of us. And that relationship can be very tenuous, very hard to get through. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to start with my personal story, which is going to include some intrigue, some suspicion, some accusation, some criminalization. It is deeply woven in a lot of stuff. But it starts with the running craze of the 70s and 80s that was propagated by Jim Fixx in his book, A Complete Guide to Running, which many of us embraced at the time. I used to own a sporting goods store. I know some of you know me from that era. It was called The Good Sports. And I, along with a lot of other people, really got Betsy in the back, got caught up in the running craze. And at that time, the idea of cross-training was just a foreign one, of taking it easy, of just running for the sake of running was sort of foreign as well. We got swept up in Jim Fixx, also Dr. Kenneth Cooper in his book Aerobics and New Aerobics to Follow, and I read both of those books copiously. I was also in the business. About 40% of my retail sales were in footwear, and a lot of them were in running. And I had a running club. Every Wednesday, a bunch of us would go out to what used to be called Sports Etc. on Route 1 between here and Freeport. And we'd run a 9-mile killer course, lots of hills, lots of speed. We ran long and we ran hard. And I once calculated during my 22 years of running that I ran probably about 30,000 miles, which is hard to imagine. Think about how it is to circumnavigate our planet and then add a few more miles to that. And this body was not meant to take that, and I think a lot of people, we had a core of running friends who today still exercise, but their exercise is not running, it's walking, and it's whatever they can do. So during the course of my running career, which spanned from 1977 to about 1999, 22 years, I developed knee injuries. It started with the meniscus tears in both of my knees. I had arthroscopic surgery. That worked for a while. I got back into running, and then it got worse and worse and worse. I had 2 more arthroscopic surgeries to go with that. In the meantime, with all the limping that I did, I was doing a number on my back, which was already damaged, my spine, I'm sure by all that pounding. I was a very heavy heel striker, and I remember one time, this was revelatory. I was running a long run on a Sunday, and I was running along, I can't remember which road it was, but it doesn't matter, near Freeport. And somebody ahead of me, I swear by a quarter of a mile, could hear me coming behind her. So, I struck hard, and I really did a lot of damage. I actually stopped running when both my knees gave out, and I was limping a lot, around 1988, 1999, as I said before. And then what ensued from that was a lot more limping. My back really started hurting, and we had to take care of the back. So in 2004, I had a fusion L4-5 in my lower back, and I was told right after that surgery that there was a possibility that I could get more back pain, because when you disable a vertebra, that means that there's added pressure above and below. Lo and behold, about 2 or 3 weeks after my surgery, pain came. And in order to mitigate that, and this is really where the intrigue comes in, my doctor prescribed low-dose methadone, which I took twice daily. I took one in the morning around 6, one in the evening around 6. 20 milligrams, not a whole lot, and it did its job. I mean, that's why methadone was developed in the first place, as a pain mitigator. I don't want to say killer, because that's too extreme. But what it did over the course of 10 years was to mask a lot of pain. It worked well, but it had its effects, side effects that were deleterious. One of them is that I would wake up in the morning very sleepy. I would take my methadone. It would get me through the day. At around 5 o'clock or so, I would take my second dose, 5 or 6. I would immediately take a nap for an hour and a half, which meant that I missed dinners, that sort of thing. Then I woke up raring to go, and I couldn't stop going until about maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and the whole cycle would just go on. And this happened for 10 years. And I learned from my children and my wife after I stopped taking it, and I'll get to that point, that I was basically in a fog for 10 years. I wasn't engaged with my children. I wasn't engaged with anything meaningful in my family. I was able to do things in the community. I wonder about my last days at work at Maine State Music Theater. How did I project myself? I have no idea, unless I asked somebody, and I did ask my children and my wife. I was on the sidelines during that time. So then we get to 2012. At that time, I was working on the Angus King for U.S. Senate campaign. And one day, I think it was July, August, I had a 90-day supply of methadone in a large container. And we had two young people who were staying with us at that time. And one of them noticed that I hadn't taken my cell phone and other things, and she mentioned to my wife that she should deliver them to me at work, which she did. But when I saw my container, which had been nearly full, at least 2/3 of it was missing. And it made me a little suspicious, but I thought very naively, well, all I have to do is go to my doctor, get it replaced, and I'm good to go. And I did, but he told me that more of this might cause his license to be suspended or rescinded, because doctors are at risk of losing their licenses if they refill lost or stolen pills in this particular case. That was a revelation to me. So that happened in the summer of 2012, and then in June of 2013, the same thing happened. It was a different circumstance, but my supply was stolen, again, from our house. And at that point, I learned that I had to file a police report. So I did, and it was just put on record. There was a little bit of an investigation, but not much. And then naively, rather than locking my house and putting all my medications into a safe, as had been suggested, my house was still accessible, as was my medication. And so this happened a third time. And this was I can tell you the date. I'd see my grandson play baseball in Portland, and on my way home, it was a Monday night, I was feeling pain in my back, and I thought, oh goodness, I've got my medication, I'll take it and I'll feel a lot better. I got home and it was missing again. So this time I knew what to do. I got immediately in touch with the police in Brunswick, as well as Bowdoin Security, because one of the students had stayed with us that time as well. And so the police got involved, Bowdoin Security got involved. They both conducted their separate investigations. And I'll tell you what ensued from that, but I can also tell you what happened to me physically after that. I learned that I could not, the next day I called my primary care physician. He said, okay, we're done. I cannot fill any prescriptions going forward. This was the start of May 2013. I had to somehow exist between May 6th and May 31st without my medication that I'd become quite reliant on. There was no alternative. And so I went through both withdrawal, even though it was low-dose methadone, and pain that I cannot describe. There's no word in the dictionary that can describe the pain that I went through. I had the shakes. I couldn't sleep. I'd be able to get maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, maybe from 4 to 6. I paced. I couldn't find a comfortable position. I lost 1 pound a day for 13 days, even though I was eating voraciously. I had so much nervous energy that I had lost weight significantly. Another phenomenon, and I don't know if this is getting off the methadone or exactly what, but it was May, so it was springtime, and there was a lot of mulch on the ground in our yard and everywhere else. For 2 weeks, all I could smell at any time I took a breath in through my nose and my mouth, mulch. Everything that I ate tasted like mulch. It was also, I don't know if you remember, spring of 2013, that it was torrential rain the whole time. So that's what I had to go through. In the meantime, pause, is it raining? Something, doesn't matter. In the meantime, I know the camera's still rolling. We tried many modalities. My wife every morning would put lidocaine patches on my back. I'd lean over like this, and 1, 2, 3. Insurance wouldn't cover that, so I was paying $30 a day for my lidocaine patches. Then I had a TENS unit. I don't know if you know what a TENS unit is. Show of hands, TENS? A few, but I'll explain what a TENS unit is. It's an electrical impulse. You attach it to your back or whatever the afflicted area is, and it sends electrical impulses there, I think basically to interrupt, cause a distraction, whatever it is. And I borrowed that from my sister, but it had a short in it. And so periodically I would get zapped by that. I mean, it was the low of the low. In the meantime, the police come in, an ambitious detective, I would say, from the Brunswick Police Department, and he starts questioning me about what happened, and that I suspected that it might have been a Bowdoin student, quite frankly, who had maybe taken my supply, and this wasn't the first time. And then he admonished me for getting in touch with Bowdoin security. He says, essentially, we don't get along. We don't trust Bowdoin security. You should not have contacted them. At which point, I'm in unbearable pain sitting across the dining room table from him. I do something I probably shouldn't have done, but pain motivated me. I said, that's not my problem, that's your problem. At which point, he turned things upside down and he says, why should you not be considered a suspect? What about your wife? And all of a sudden, I turned from victim to criminal. I had to defend myself. I've never been in a position like that before. It was the craziest thing. If I understand now how people who are accused falsely of doing something feel. It is a helpless feeling. And we set up security cameras inside the house and so on and so forth. In the meantime, back to my doctor. When he said, I can't do anything for you, his words to me were, you should check into Mercy Hospital Care Center. It's in Westbrook. And I actually drove with Kathy and did a pre-admission. This is now the Wednesday following the Monday of the incident. I went there, I was pre-admitted. They assumed that I was going to become an inpatient for 2 weeks and go through detox and withdraw, all of that stuff. It was that dire. And then on the way home, my wife said, you know, you can do that, but you're not going to have the personal care that you would have at home. You'd be more comfortable at home in your own surroundings and with care that I can give you that I don't think anybody else can. So I decided wisely, I think, to do that. And she helped me along with other people. And this is what I want to say. I gave an abbreviated version of this talk at First Parish Church 3 months ago. And what I mentioned then was that God's emissaries, or spiritual beings, entities, came into my life. And I call them God's emissaries, I said back then, because some men don't like to be called angels. Angels, so we'll call them angels. And I am telling you that I had hands reaching out to me in the most unexpected places. I'd be taking my dog, and he was another great complement to my healing. through a walk in the woods, and I'd encounter somebody, a friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. We'd get into discussions about what was going on. I had another friend, and I'll name him by name, Steve Bagoni, who used to be the director of the Curtis Memorial Library and now is retiring director of Portland Library. Came the Saturday of, not even a week out, he said, let's go for a walk. And it was the most painful walk that I've ever experienced, but it was the right thing to do at the time. And everywhere, I encountered my angels who helped me through this whole thing. So that's the first 25 days, or the latter 25 days of May. I have an opportunity on June 1st to replenish my supply of methadone. But I've been through so much, I was still in a lot of pain, and that was no longer an alternative for me, so I dispensed with that. And I continued another 25 days of agony, my 50 days of agony, which has given me a glimpse, I think a clear look actually into the window of those who are really suffering chronic pain, who probably can't be here today because they're so immobile. And I think that 50-day look into the window, into the depth of chronic pain has given me an insight that I would not have otherwise. So I thank, believe it or not, the person who stole my supply. I thank my 50 days of agony, because out of that, I have learned so much. I have just completely redone my life. One may not notice it on the surface, but I have looked at everything differently. I've got into, there's one person here that I'd like to hopefully not embarrass, but Kim Sullivan right here is a personal trainer. I started with her in July of 2013, and she has been instrumental in a portion of my recovery. And but I've done everything. I've done acupuncture, I've done massage therapy, meditating, which I recommend, deep breathing, mindfulness, on and on and on and on. In fact, I want to mention one thing. I've completely changed my posture. I completely changed how I sit, how I stand, and how I walk. There's a book here, Pain-Free Sitting, Standing, and Walking, written by Craig Williamson, who's an occupational therapist in Portland, Maine. And he's nationally renowned. And he's gotten me to sitting differently, standing differently, and walking differently. I never lean back against a chair, and I'm not suggesting that you change anything right now. But I can stand. I would say I could stand for probably 2 hours at one time without having to sit, and that was never the case before. It's just a whole new way of looking at things. And my recovery has involved a lot of that. Just looking at I look at how I shaved it. I shave differently. My morning, every part of my routine, how I arrange things, and it's wonderful. It is such a lively thing to do. I recommend it highly. I've become a better mechanic. I can visualize things that need repair and go there. I was never able to do that. I do not look at the next thing. I look at what I'm doing at the moment. And I've had a hard time actually coming up with the title of a presentation like this. I've called it Living with Pain, Living with Chronic Pain. One among us said, I'm existing, because that's often the answer from people with chronic pain. I am in a situation, I would call my situation chronic pain light. My pain is in my back. It's affected by weather changes, either highs or lows, anything like this front that just came in. I could predict that a few hours ahead. When it clears, I'll also be afflicted in my back. I've got a number of diseases. I have cardiovascular disease. I have reflux disease. I have a hiatal hernia, and I also have celiac disease, which I acquired or at least learned about 5 years ago. So there's a lot going on, but my daughter, who came to celebrate my 73rd birthday on February 8th, asked me, what's it like to be 73? And I paused for a while, and I said to her, because I wanted to come up with the right words, I said to her, and I truly feel this way, this is the most joyous time in my life. I love life because I'm so engaged in it. And then we also talked about end of life. She said, I said to Kendra, if you look at the actuarial tables, it would appear that my life will end, who knows, 10, 15 years, hopefully longer, who knows. And she started crying. I thought, oh, geez, what have I done? There's so much love to be had, and my advice would be just enjoy the moment. Accept the pain that you have. When I was going through my crisis, I went to an orthopedic surgeon because I was still looking for surgical modalities to help me. And he looked at my x-rays and my MRI, and he said, you are such a mess. You have my spine, I'm fused C1 to T1, I've got this fusion as well. He said to me, you can do no more damage, which was just the right thing to say. He said, go out, engage your endorphins. Do whatever you want to do. And it was my license to take up golf, which I'd never taken, never played before. I started 2 years ago, and my guess is I've played 100 rounds of golf since. I love the sport. I have let loose because I have that license to do that. I will not do any more damage, I don't think. He also said stall. Don't do the surgeries. Keep it going forward. Maybe over time something will come up, a magical shot or something, but I think one of the lessons that I learned really is to recalibrate. Anytime a crisis hits, a dear friend of mine said, what you need to do is accept. I will never use the word embrace. How can you embrace pain? But we hear that all the time. But accept what you have, recalibrate, and just go forward with the condition that you're in right now. And I think that is great advice because we're adjusting our minds all the time. Every stimulus that comes to us causes a reaction, and it may not be the one that we expect. And so you recalibrate, and I've used that a lot in my life. And I will stress again the spiritual component of healing because I think that is hugely important. And I think I'll stop at this point and ask for questions or comments. Libby.
You had this crisis where the last methadone was stolen and you had to go 25 days in pain.
Yes, well, and another 25 days before I got some relief.
And another, right.
So it was a 50 days.
So, okay, 50 days you were in pain, and from then until now, are you still in that same pain?
That's a good question, and I should have mentioned this. I had a radio frequency ablation, which is a procedure that's supposed to deaden the offending nerves, and it worked maybe about 15%. So that was my first relief, and that was actually January 25th. So 25 days in May, 25 days in January. I got some relief, but I'd get pinched nerves and not really be comfortable until April of last year. So almost a year of hard to live with pain. And then I went to a physiatrist, term I'd never heard of, at Brunswick Rehabilitation Services, which is in the industrial park, and it's part of Spectrum Medical Group. And the doctor asked me a question that I've answered many, many times. Have you had shots? And my answer, stimulus response, yes, but they didn't work.
You had shots for what?
Shots for back pain.
Okay.
So cortisone shots.
Okay.
And I've been asked that question so many times, and my response is yes, but they didn't work. And then I thought, that was 12 years ago. Or actually 10 years ago. So let's talk. maybe things have changed. He said there are two types of shots. One is the one that I know is site-specific, where they try to pinpoint. The other one they call, in that profession, they call it the grenade. It's a flood of cortisone that they send up from the base of your spine all the way up to mid-spine. And the hope there is that it will catch some of the offending nerves. And lo and behold, it did. Not everything. And arthritis still lingers, but that made a significant difference in my pain.
It's holding you now?
It is. I can get,
How long
I'm
has that
allowed
been?
to get up to 3 a year. And I had one in April, I had one in November, and I don't need one yet this year, so I found a way. Yes?
They say there's no such thing as a stupid question, so I'll go ahead and ask. But very often when one is seeing a physical therapist or a doctor, the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this hurt? Is there any relevance to that, to what you've gone through?
I always get asked that. And I know some people say 11. As far as I'm concerned, 10, you're dead. So I never go to 10. I might say 9.9 or 9.5, that sort of thing. It means I'm barely existing. But I've thought a lot about that. Pain is such a personal thing. Your 5 may be somebody else's 10 because they have a lower tolerance for pain. It is such a subjective thing. I know it's got to be keyed in and that sort of thing. I don't subscribe to that. I mean, I know it's an attempt to measure that, but it's so personal. I'm in pain, and the other thing is that I think the traditional medical profession, unless a doctor has experienced pain, and how many doctors are so debilitated that they can actually continue to doctor, I don't think they know pain. I think they have no idea. And we're also in a culture, I call it America, but particularly New England, where you stiff upper lip, it's nothing, I don't want to talk about it, and that creates isolation, depression, this kind of relationship with your loved one, your caregiver, whatever it is so injurious. So, not a stupid question at all. There is no such thing. Edie.
Are you going to talk about the Tai Chi walking there?
Yes, that is also a cool thing. There's also a CD, DVD, which goes with this. And it's really a new way of walking. It's walking, it's part of what Craig says, which you won't know about until you read the book, but it's a really good book. I try to stand tall, walk tall, and sit tall. And so Tai Chi walking is partially that. With the tall, you're stretching your spine, so you're trying to create some space. So that's always a good thing. It's also good, I think, psychically for us. But Tai Chi walking has you walking upright, but also with your hip flexors forward. That's the key. The other thing I can tell you about walking, and I never knew this about walking or running, is, and this is Kim, you engage your core. And your core, most people think their core is their stomach, their ab, but it's the entire area. So I've learned in my walking to balance, to engage my abs, and it takes the load off your back when you walk. It's amazing. I've distributed that equally between my abs and my back, and it makes walking. I walk 4 miles a day, and I love my walking, and I come back feeling just great. But that's part of Tai Chi walking. I think the hip flexors. Yes, sir.
Did you try OxyContin by any chance?
No, I
Is that
do.
one of the painkillers?
It is a painkiller, and the only time I've done it is after surgeries. I mean, I've had knees replaced, I've had this, I mentioned shoulder replacement, you name the replacement, I've had it. And I have used it then, but otherwise, no, just on short
So
term.
now you're the bionic man?
I'm put together with baling wire and duct tape. Yes. And so what I've wanted to say really is that our lives need to go beyond existing and living into thriving. And I mentioned that I've had a little trouble coming up with the title of my presentation. I think it should be this: living, and in parentheses, even thriving with chronic pain. Because that is my life right now. And I would hope that others could be that way. I mean, I think, I really, my chronic pain is chronic pain, like, relative to what a lot of other people experience. But as I mentioned before, I've been there in the depths. So I know what that's about, but those 50 days disappeared and I got better. At First Parish Church, after a gathering, church I should say, I had a gathering of people who were interested in discussing the subject further. And it was it was a wonderful mix of people in pain and caregivers and so on and so forth. And they unanimously said, why don't you start a chronic pain support group? So I did. And I went away for about 6 weeks, so I had to put it to a halt. I had 3 sessions, and those sessions were modestly attended, which goes back to the biblical when 2 or 3 are gathered together. It was about 2 or 3 of us who were gathered together. But I think there was a benefit to the 2 or 3 of us who were gathered together. And I feel it's almost my ministry, which is supported by Mary Bard, who's the minister at First Parish Church, to carry this forward. And I'm not going to give up on the support group. I've researched others around the state, and I see none that has been a bubble up or a grassroots organization or formulation. The only one that I found is Southern Maine Chronic Pain Support Association or something like that, which is fostered by UNE. And so there's a lot of money behind it. There's some great personal stories, some really interesting ones. But I feel that there are so many people trying to cope with chronic pain in our population that something needs to be done about it at the grassroots level. And I think a support group is the way to go, despite the modest beginnings. So I'm going to keep going on that, and I'd love to have any of you who are interested maybe be part of that.
I'm going to thank you for that, not for myself
Mhm.
personally, because I don't have pain like you do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my generation anyway, or within 10 years on either side of me, or 20 years on either side of me, uses the medical profession, fix me, give me a shot, I'll go home, I'll be better in 24 hours, 2 weeks, something. We need to get back to identifying who we are and what we are living with. We're not perfect, we have our things that need to be taken care of, and
Mhm.
I think that's a great start. Thank you, Bob.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Libby. Thank you for being here. Any other questions or comments? I'd be happy to welcome them.
Is methadone comparable to morphine?
Uh,
I mean, it's like an across-the-board painkiller.
That's a good question. I do not know for sure. I would think maybe so, but I'm not certain of that.
And so they gave you methadone versus cortisone because you can't give cortisone on a regular basis. It has to be given only so many.
That is a reason that was not given to me, but it makes sense. Because it was obviously a recognition of chronic pain, and this is how you can get through it. Methadone, I have learned, is used for older patients, and the idea there is that they take it until they die, no matter the consequences of their using
The side effects.
the side effects. And the side effects, I learned, I didn't know about the side effects until I got off it.
And it's habit forming.
But,
It's habit
well,
forming.
you know, I had an experience. This is back to this large medical group. I'm going to call it a business in Portland. I would call in a lot of times, I need relief. My primary care physician abandoned me at the time that I needed him the most because he had no alternative to my getting off and going to a recovery clinic. But I still was in contact. I've since changed primary care physicians. And I've since written him a letter expressing my displeasure at what happened. My point being, I've kind of lost it, I'm sorry. Can anybody get me back on point? I talked about my primary care physician. Oh, geez. Mary Alice, I'm sorry.
Habit forming.
Oh, habit forming. Yeah,
Methadone.
yeah. I didn't know at the time that I took methadone, it was, at that point, it wasn't, it was considered a safe alternative. But the idea is just, it strings you along. And, you know, I was talking about the side effects of it. They're horrible. And I just feel sorry for those who are stuck on methadone. Oh, this is the point that I was gonna make. I would always call, not always, but I often called the medical group, and I would talk to a nurse, and I said, I need something, I need relief, lidocaine patches. I talked to my insurance company about paying for them. No, they wouldn't pay for them. But at one point, the nurse said, oh, I know about you. You take methadone. And I said, yes, and I used a word that I shouldn't have used, but it's used often. I said, I'm dependent on methadone to mitigate my pain. And she said, well, you might call it dependency, but it's also addiction. And I swear to all of you, I never exceeded my supply. Dependent has a bad connotation nowadays, and dependent is, I guess, synonymous with addiction. But I railed at that. And I said, no, I'm not dependent, I am reliant on, what's in a word? Well, nowadays, there's a lot in a word. I'm reliant on methadone to get me through the day. So it is addictive, and it's abused, obviously, but that's what was prescribed for me. Allison?
Am I mistaken? I always understood that cortisone could actually, at least temporarily, cure a pain because of the steroids. But methadone, it seems, just masks the pain.
It does.
So it doesn't do anything to make your
No.
disease or your condition better, it just makes it more comfortable to get through the day.
It's insidious that way. I mean, it does its work, but I will use the word, it's a painkiller, but that's right. Gets you through the day, and it's not curative.
Rob, when the doctor prescribed that for you,
Yeah.
did he give you an alternative of something else that would be no?
No.
That was the only thing that he could give you. He couldn't.
We didn't
say-
talk about, and one thing that really annoys me about him is that he had the audacity to say, I can manage pain better than most pain clinics can. And that was a fairly recent comment. No alternatives.
Yeah, and you trust your doctor to, help you. And,
Yes. Yeah, and at the most critical time, he abandoned me.
Did you seek a second opinion at that moment?
I didn't, Mary Alice. I was looking for relief. I was so
really
desperate. And the other thing that I will say in the course of that is that I'm fairly articulate, thank goodness, because I had to do my own, and you've heard this, and maybe you've had to do the same thing, I had to be a self-advocate. I had to research all the pain clinics. I was given suggestions by the medical group, and I would call them and say, yes, we can take you in a month and a half. Or we're not taking any new patients. So I had to do all the research. I had to charm and cajole my way to get an earlier appointment. I mean, I hate to say this about myself, but I can do that. But there are a lot of people who cannot advocate for themselves and don't know how to go through the morass of the medical community the way it's constituted today. And I finally found a place, thank goodness, close to where I live that helped me out. But it was a nightmare. And I can't let it go. And Karen.
So often chronic pain and depression form a vicious cycle. They feed each other.
Mm-hmm.
When did you find it the lowest as far as depression? Was it when you were on methadone, when you were off of methadone? And what helped you to cope, to get over those negative thoughts?
It was when I was off the methadone, because methadone seems to also even out the
Makes it.
temperament and makes you, and I told you about that haziness that I lived in for 10 years. But it was a usual rainy, I mean, the rain was relentless, and it just added to my depression. And I was desperate. I think it was probably within the first week to 10 days. And I knew there was no solution. Although one of them was the unthinkable. And that was the worst condition I had. You know, and the thing is that there are people who live that way now. I mean, I just feel so sorry for them, and you'd like to get them out, you'd like to help them, but I just think all of this needs to be ferreted out and become more in the public consciousness.
Rob,
Yes, Bob.
what's the name of this place you said was near your home that you
Oh,
had?
it's called Medical Rehabilitation Services, and it's in the industrial park.
Okay, that's Spectrum, right?
Spectrum Medical Group.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
To try, I know, thinking about pain and exercise don't really go together, but it does, because the exercise will make it easier for you to get through the day, and I've had that, and it worked for me. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna work for everybody.
I am so glad that you mentioned exercise, because the more, I should have mentioned that, and I'm pleased that you brought it up. The more I do my research and talk with people, the most important thing for people in pain is to exercise. And as we know, it doesn't have to be tough stuff. It can be
You don't have to
walking.
lift 300
Sure,
pounds
yeah.
at a time.
It is hugely important. And that first step is, I know, the hardest step for somebody who's not used to exercise. But walking to the mailbox or something like that starts it all. I mean, that's how I started my running. I could barely run around the block when I first started running. I was a smoker, and it developed into something else, and it doesn't have to. But no, that's a very important, in fact, considered by the medical community the most important factor in healing from chronic pain. Hang on just a second, Dallas. Did you have it? No, you just went. Okay. Bob.
At the Spectrum there, Dr. Brar, that I went to see, Alexandra Brar, she was trying to get me to try medical marijuana, which I didn't want to get involved with. What was your opinion there?
Yeah. It was suggested to me a few times, but I didn't do it.
Okay. So what do they have you doing now?
What do they have me doing?
Yes.
Just the shot. Are you talking about medical rehabilitation
Yeah.
services? Just the shot. I see them 2 or 3 times a year, and it seems to help quite a bit. But
My problem's in my knees and my shoulder, particularly the left one.
yeah,
I used to get cortisone in the shoulder.
Yeah. yeah, the cortisone has helped me a lot. So, any other comments or questions? Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.